É uma grande honra para a Fundação Alexandre de Gusmão e para o Instituto de Pesquisa de Relações Internacionais receber aqui o professor David Shambaugh. Este projeto de estudar a Ásia e a China está incluído no programa de trabalho da Fundação, onde nós temos seminários durante o ano e que culminam uma conferência, o Brasil e o mundo que vem aí, que é o grande momento das relações exteriores nossas. Mas no caso específico da China, nós não fizemos o seminário. Nós já fizemos este ano uma grande conferência, convocando os grandes especialistas brasileiros, os que não são especialistas, e também convocando o mundo acadêmico, grandes protagonistas do mundo acadêmico norte-americano. A ideia do vetor do saber. Nós já convidamos para a primeira conferência, e eu aqui tenho o relatório, os textos acadêmicos da primeira conferência. Do mundo acadêmico americano, inclusive nós convidamos para evitar o paroquialismo, para fazer uma reunião, nós convidamos o professor Mark Selden e o professor Pempel, que já estiveram aqui e participaram. E eu, inclusive, passaria já ao professor David o relatório da nossa conferência sobre a China. E também passaria o nosso relatório sobre a Ásia como um todo. Ele vai falar sobre a Ásia como um todo. E nós já faríamos o nosso relatório aqui. E eu queria dizer que nós procuramos aqui no Ministério fazer o que os americanos fazem, não o que eles nos mandam fazer. E por isso é que nós já estamos apresentando a ele, estudando a Ásia e a China, e os americanos dão muito valor à educação, ao conhecimento, ao vetor do saber. E é por isso que nós consideramos uma oportunidade extraordinária que o professor David Shambaugh possa vir aqui proferir essa conferência para vocês. Eu pediria também agora que o nosso embaixador Roberto Jaguaribe falasse, que é o responsável por toda essa área da África e da Ásia, e ele falasse em nome do Ministério, e é um partícipe muito íntimo deste projeto. Agora, Professor Shambaugh, he has been Professor of Political Science and International Relations in the Elliott School of International Affairs at George Washington University, Director of China Policy Program, and he has written more than 25 books, 200 articles, and book chapters, and many opinions editorials. He is a frequent commentator on Chinese and Asian affairs. So he has so many titles that I would like to avoid reading all these titles, and I would invite Professor Jaguaribe to make a short comment on this matter.
Muito obrigado. I thank very much Ambassador Jerônimo Moscado, not just for this opportunity, but also for all the initiatives he has been undertaking as head of the FUNAG in the development of further interaction between official government institutions and especially the Ministry of Foreign Relations and academic circles. It is fundamental for all of us in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to be able to renew our knowledge and our grasp of major international issues through an interaction with the academic circles. And these initiatives, not just this one, by FUNAG, since Ambassador Jerônimo Moscardo became its president, and Ambassador Cardim at IPRI, have been extremely relevant and purposeful to the extent that they have been able to provide us with a continuous flow of interaction with very well-renowned professors throughout the world, not just in Brazil. And here today we have a wonderful opportunity to listen to Professor David Shambaugh, who, in his capacity as professor and as Ambassador Moscardo has said, as the Americans do, has a tradition of interaction with his own State Department and the National Security Council. I think he has been advisor to both during his early academic life. But of course, this continues to be true. And this is a sort of fountain where the public officers must always drink. And I think that this is a very important experience for us. And we're very thankful for FUNAG, Ambassador Jerônimo Moscardo, and especially for Professor David Shambaugh to be able to accept the invitation and come to Brazil and prefer this conference today. We did not speak too much about China because that's exactly what he is going to do. But just a few brief remarks in relation to our own assessment. I think that the ascension of China is the most important political and international development of the recent world history, and within that context, the ascension of China. And I think it's important to realize that from our perspective, it may perhaps seem to be an ascension, but from their perception, it's just recuperating places where they had always been, but for a brief interval of perhaps 300 years. And so it's very different, the perception. For us, it's very new. For them, it's where they should always be and where they always had been. And I think this is one of the important elements to take into account. Of course, Brazil is developing enormously our relations with the region. We have increased our trade dramatically, and this seems to be something we are really running after and not leading, where sometimes it's the case. It's the market, essentially the dynamics of the Asian entrepreneurs and businesses that have pushed our trade to the extent that there is an enormous trade today. Of course, China is on the verge of becoming our second most important trade partner. Their own statistics point to over $30 billion of trade in the last year, 2007. We have some discrepancies, our own figures closer to 25, but still, of course, it's a very relevant figure, and it's an enormous and continuous growth. This is being picked up by India presently, and by older and more traditional partners, which continue to be very relevant, such as Japan, which is our most traditional partner in Asia, and perhaps the most well-known to Brazil on account of the importance of Japanese immigration to Brazil. And of course, Korea, which is also a very old and traditional partner, at least in the 70s. But all of this is just a general background, and I would like to thank again Ambassador Moscardo, Ambassador Cardim, and especially Ambassador Shambaugh for his availability to be here with us today and present us his views on the issue. Professor Shambaugh.
Before he starts, I would like to thank you very much the participation in this conference of the most important think tank in Brazil, of the Chamber of Deputies. I see Professor Ricardo, and he participates with all our colleagues in this endeavor. I thank you. The idea is the beginning of a close relationship between our Congress, our Chamber of Deputies, with his biggest think tank in Brazil, and Itamaraty. I thank you.
Okay, good. Oh, Ambassador Jaguaribe, before you leave, Ambassador Moscardo,
Ambassador Cardine and Ambassador Dunlap, you are also.
No, I'm coming back.
Okay, it's all right. I really very much appreciate the opportunity and the honor to speak here at the Alexandre Gusmão Fundación. It is a distinct honor and pleasure for me to have this opportunity. I travel to other parts of the world, but this is the first time I've ever had the chance to give a lecture in Brazil. My lecture today is about all of Asia, the international relations of Asia, because tomorrow morning in Rio, I will be speaking about the rise of China. So I had to distinguish two different speeches. So today, I will talk a lot more about the international relations of Asia. But before you leave, let me just offer one observation. And one observation. The apology is for speaking in English. I understand that this is not your native language, but unfortunately I have no Portuguese. So I have no option but to speak in my native language unless you want me to deliver the lecture in Chinese, which I could do. But the observation is, I think, more important. I come to Latin America on this visit to learn more about not just Brazil, but other Latin American countries' interactions with China and with Asia more broadly. We North Americans need to educate ourselves more on what you South Americans are doing with China and with Latin American countries. But more importantly, we need to increase our interaction between North America and South America amongst academic colleagues and amongst officials. For example, I don't know, Ambassador Dunlap, if you have consultations with Christopher Hill and the East Asia Department of the State Department to share your views about Asia. But if you don't, it might be a good idea, the same way that you have consultations with Asian nations about the United States, no doubt. So we live in the same hemisphere, at least physically, but I don't think we live in the same hemisphere intellectually or politically. And we need to close this gap intellectually and politically. Globalization mandates that we do so. It's not only South-South cooperation, but also North-South cooperation. We live in the same world. China is a rising power that affects all of our interests, and we need to share our knowledge and our experiences with each other about China and about Japan. Your president, you are preparing for a presidential visit to East Asia very soon in the next few days. And that's very important. It shows the increased interaction between Brazil and East Asia. Our president, on the contrary, has just canceled a visit to East Asia, at least to South Korea. So my point is that I welcome this opportunity, and I would like to see more such opportunities for academic colleagues and officials from the United States and Brazil and other Latin countries to interact together, to share views and to learn from each other. So that's my observation. You may go now. So, as I say, what I would like to speak about this morning is the totality of the Asian region, which is a very big region. We're talking about 37 nations. And the international relations of the Asian region are changing significantly in many ways, but I'd like to argue at two different levels. The first level is state to state, second level is society to society. That's the main argument of the lecture today. But the Asian regional system is changing as a result of interactions at both of these levels. While governments in Asia interact and cooperate increasingly on many issues to an unprecedented degree, the societies do so even cooperate and interact even more so. And the depth of globalization and interdependence between the societies is really very dramatic. And I will give you some examples of this later in the talk. And in some ways, I think the interdependence among the societies helps to buffer the still existing suspicions and some volatility, if you know this word, to be instabilities at the state-to-state level. If you look at the state-to-state level and major power interactions in the region, there is still a lot of uncertainty and volatility between the major powers, between the United States and China, between China and Japan in particular. So in some ways, the increasing density of interactions at the societal level helped, I think, to contain some of these and to forge cooperation at the state-to-state level. So that's the main argument I'm going to make this morning, but let me start with some observations more broadly about trends and facts about the Asia-Pacific region. First, the most distinguishing characteristic about Asia, unlike other regions of the world, such as Latin America, is the remarkable diversity of this region in all characteristics, geographically, culturally, ethnically, religiously, politically, economically, technologically, linguistically, energy, militarily. Every dimension that you look at, Asia is characterized by diversity, not commonality. It has some of the world's most well-developed societies and some of the world's poorest, least well-developed societies. The per capita GDP of Laos is $260 per year. The per capita GDP of Japan is $32,000 per year. Same region. We have some of the world's strongest, that is to say, military powers in East Asia and in South Asia with India, as well as some of the weakest. So diversity is really a major characteristic of this region that spans 37 nation states from the Hindu Kush in the Afghan-Pakistan border all the way to the Western Pacific. Now, Asia really, international relations of Asia combine 5 subregions together, at least for the scholars who study this region. We can now not only talk about East Asia. For many years since the Second World War, we have only spoken of Asian international relations meant only East Asia. It's not so anymore. Asian international relations today comprise Central Asia, South Asia, Southeast Asia, Northeast Asia, and Australasia, we call it, the Western Pacific. So this, and there are linkages across these subregions at both the governmental level and at the societal level that are drawing this region together. So we as scholars, at least, and perhaps even as diplomats, we can speak now about pan-regional phenomenon. And many foreign ministries around the world have reconfigured themselves bureaucratically to take account of this change. I don't know about the Brazilian foreign ministry, if you include everything from Afghanistan to Japan down to Australia in one directorate or not. Many European governments do, and many Asian foreign ministries do. The United States is still not fully there. We now include South Asia together with Southeast and Northeast Asia in one bureau of the Department of State, but Central Asia is still outside. So the interactions across the region are very notable. There are still a lot of characteristics that define Asian international relations today that have been with us for a number of years. First of all, the American presence and the alliance system that the United States built up after the Second World War, and particularly the Vietnam War, the Americans' Vietnam War. That is still a very significant feature, if not the most significant feature, of the Asian regional security order. There are other features of that order I will come back to in a minute, but this is not new, the American alliance system. Rising China, this is not new either, not for Asians. It's, as we heard in our introductory remarks, China has been the predominant power in Asia for many centuries. It just had a kind of bad 200 to 300 years. But certainly since 1978 and the Deng Xiaoping reforms, China has been rising. But that's not new. We continue to see an uncertain Japan, a Japan that's not quite certain of its own Asian regional identity. And its relations with the United States are very clear, but its relations with other Asian states not so clear. That's been a feature of post-war Japanese Asian diplomacy. We continue to see a divided Korea and a divided China. The Korean Peninsula divided between two sovereign nation states. China divided between one sovereign nation state and one non-sovereign entity, Taiwan. But in both cases, there are what we call security dilemmas between these two states arising out of their division. That's been with us for a very long time. It's been with us for 4 decades, 5 decades. It's not new, but it continues to define much of the Asian order today. ASEAN, the Association for Southeast Asian Nations, has now enjoyed their 40th anniversary last year, and it is increasingly confident and coherent as an actor in the region. That is not new either, so that is another feature. And we have seen the gradual transition of many Asian political systems from autocracies to democracies over the last 15 years, really. There are still some exceptions to this rule. Vietnam, Laos, People's Republic of China, Democratic People's Republic of Korea. These 4 states continue to be really one-party states, but the rest of the region has moved towards democracy, and it's also moved away from military rule. Many South Asian and Southeast Asian countries had been dominated by militaries and security services, indeed South Korea also. We now see those countries, the militaries having gone back to the barracks, taking care of national security affairs, not internal security affairs, and not dominating, not playing a role in politics. So the democratization of East Asia and South Asia is significant. Certainly the most long-standing characteristic of East Asia is the economic growth, the dynamic economic growth that has characterized this region since the 1960s, since the so-called tiger economies began to take off. I will give you some more figures about that in a minute. So these are some elements of international relations of Asia that are not new, and we have to remember that they are still there. They are still present, and they still define the region. But there are some new elements that characterize international relations in Asia that have appeared very recently, just in the last few years, that we must take account of. This includes the rise of India and India's regional role. India was not a significant actor outside of South Asia until this decade. India did not play much of a role on the international stage until this decade. India's economy, very underdeveloped, wasn't very significant until this decade. India was not engaged very deeply in regional multilateral diplomacy until this decade. So the role of New Delhi in Asian international relations is new, and important. We see a re-engaged Russia also in Asia, or at least an attempt to re-engage itself. Russia sort of, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, withdrew internally. 12 of the former republics of the Soviet Union became sovereign independent states, many of them in Central Asia. And Russia really retired diplomatically from the Asian scene. It still is, but at least in certain characteristics, such as North Korea, 6-party talks, we see an attempt by Moscow to get back in the game of East Asian international relations. We've seen a rebalancing of major power relations in the region. We've seen a growth, slowly, of inter-regional multilateral institutions and forums, both at the governmental and non-governmental level. For many years, specialist argued that Asia was not ripe for regionalism, that Asia, because of the diversity of Asia, we would never have the emergence of a European Union style organization in Asia, and we still do not, and I would argue we never will have a European Union of Asia or an Asian Union. But we have nonetheless seen the growth of a number of multilateral institutions at the governmental and non-governmental level, which I will come back to, but I just want to highlight this today. So the growth of regionalism, very new. Terrorism, rather new. It's new for all of us since 2001. Although in Asia, in fact, in the southern Philippines and in Thailand, in particular, in Malaysia, and even in northwestern China, Xinjiang province, there have been terrorists operating for more than 2-3 decades. But since 9/11, we have seen the rise of radical Islam and Al-Qaeda linked groups in Indonesia in particular, but also in the southern Philippines. And we have seen increasing separatist movements in Taiwan, in India, in Indonesia, in Sri Lanka. And these are rather new features. And the last new feature of Asian international relations is in the military realm. Not all, but many militaries across the region are investing considerably in modernizing their forces, particularly China and some other Northeast Asian states and India. So these are some new features that we haven't seen previously. So how do these features fit together? I'm going to, for the sake of time, not give you any more characteristics, or maybe just a couple characteristics of the Asian order that you should be aware of. I mean, first of all, economically, Asia has been the fastest growing region in the world since the 1980s, for more than 2 decades now. Asia accounts today for 35% of the world economy, global GDP, and has been growing at rates of 30-40% in recent years. And at these current rates, Asia will account for roughly 50%, half of all GDP in the world by the year 2020, if these growth rates continue. All Asian nations have enjoyed positive growth during the last 2 decades. Not a single one have had negative growth. Even Japan, which has been the most sort of dormant or stagnant economy in the region, still grew at 1.9% over the last 20 years. China, at the other end of the scale, has grown at 14% per year, 14% on average over the last 20 years. India, 7%. So Asia economic growth is driving international economic growth, even here in Latin America. We are all tied together with the Asian economies, and particularly the Chinese economy. This is not a zero-sum game. This is a interdependent, positive-sum phenomenon. 6 of the world's top 20 trading nations today are Asian. And as Asia has grown, has developed, it has grown very rich. Today, China has $1.7 trillion in foreign exchange. 6 of the world's 10 largest holders of foreign exchange are in the are in East Asia alone. And out of a global total of $4 trillion of foreign exchange holdings by governments, 2.8 trillion out of 4 trillion are in East Asia. So this is a very wealthy region, and it's getting more wealthy. Every year, 60% of global capital FDI flows into Asia, $150 billion per year from outside the region. So this is becoming a very wealthy region very quickly, and as the development of the region has continued, Asia's demands for energy inputs and raw material inputs, particularly China's, has also grown. And China has had to look all over the globe for energy inputs. That includes here in Brazil, next door in Chile, and other in Peru, but also in Central Asia and in Africa. It is a global phenomenon. In terms of regional security, Asia accounts for 5 of the world's 10 largest military ground forces, standing armies today, 2 of the world's 4 largest navies. In total defense expenditure, Asia today, if you add together the individual nations' defense expenditures, is almost equal to the spending of NATO in 2005. Asians spent $256 billion US dollars on defense. Europeans spent $259 billion US dollars on defense. So in total spending, very similar. And as I mentioned, almost all the militaries in East Asia have been modernizing themselves, modernizing themselves both in terms of equipment but also personnel. They've been buying more modern equipment from abroad because they do not have domestic defense industries. Only China really has a domestic defense industry, and even the Chinese domestic defense industry has had some difficulties over the years. So China has turned to Russia for $3 billion per year of arms imports since the year 2000. Although in the last year, 2007, they have plummeted to almost zero. Interesting phenomenon. The Russians, for some reason, have decided to stop or severely limit their arms sales to China just in the last year. Why is the question. I'm told that the Russians now do not need the Chinese export market as much as they did after the Soviet Union collapsed. They were very dependent on the Chinese export market, or their own defense industries would have collapsed. Today, Russia apparently has a greater number of customers abroad, and it's not so dependent on China, and it's not so sure that they want to be arming China on their southern border. So despite $3 billion a year over the last 10 years, that's $30 billion altogether of arms, very sophisticated aircraft, very sophisticated submarines, very sophisticated destroyers, assistance on ballistic missiles, on cruise missiles. The Russians have been very important for the Chinese, but this may be changing. And if you look at other militaries in the region, not the least of which is India, you will see similar modernization. Okay, so this is why Asia is important. Asia is a very complex region, and people like Ambassador Dunlop have a very complex, difficult job, I would say, in trying to understand the different levels of interaction in the region. So let me talk now, if I can, a little bit about the major power interactions and the interstate relations in Asia today. And then I will speak a little bit about society to society relations and interactions, and then have some concluding comments, and then would be very interested in your own viewpoints on these subjects. Well, major power rivalry and suspicions is nothing new in Asia. That's the first point. We have seen, well, let's put it this way, this is the first time in over 130 years in which there is no war taking place in Asia. Asia has been known for the last century, or more than century, for conflict. And some of this conflict is internal to countries, insurgencies, but some of it has been interstate. So the good news is that there is no interstate conflict today, but we have to remember the past, because Asians remember the past. There's a lot of suspicion in Asia between different countries, between China and Japan, between North Korea and South Korea, between China and Taiwan, between Indonesia and Australia, between Indonesia and Singapore, between Singapore and Malaysia, between Thailand and Vietnam, between India and Pakistan, between India and China, and between Mongolia and China, and between the United States and China, and the United States and Vietnam. So I don't know, how many did I just list? 12? Historically, these are the main rivalries of Asia. And the good news is that today all of these relationships are cooperative and normal, and they are not antagonistic or militarized. Every one of those that I just named, there has been a transformation, a rather radical transformation in the last 10 to 15, really 10 years, with the exceptions of North Korea, South Korea, and China, Taiwan. That still, those remain the most difficult. What is, and the United States position in Asia has also, I think, relatively diminished. The United States is still, I would say, the predominant power in Asia. That is to say, it's the strongest power. But strength does not equal influence. And the American position in Asia, as elsewhere in the world, has declined since 9/11 and the Bush administration in particular. But even prior to the Bush administration, I think we began to see a rebalancing of relations among the major powers in East Asia. And that has included, beginning in 1997-98, China's own diplomatic offensive in the region, its charm offensive. The Chinese position as a government in the region has dramatically improved over the last 10 years for various reasons. Some owed to China, some owing to East Asians and South Asians' views of China. 10 years ago, if you traveled around Asia, around China in Asia, you hear a lot of suspicions about Beijing. You know, what are the Chinese up to? Are they going to try and recreate the traditional tribute system that they had for 3,000 years? Are they going to dominate us again as they did for 3,000 years, but not in a coercive fashion, but in a very Chinese fashion? Today, if you travel around China's periphery, you do not hear those views expressed as strongly. You still hear them. You hear them where? You hear them in Tokyo, you hear them in Hanoi, and you hear them in New Delhi. 3 capitals. And Singapore, sorry, 4. These 4 countries still are what we call hedging against China. They are not sure about a rising China. They don't know what China's long-term goals in Asia are, and whether once China becomes strong again, it will be the peaceful power that it says it will be. Maybe it will be, maybe it won't be. So these countries have, together with the United States and Japan, been engaged in a kind of hedging strategy. At least in the United States, we call this the hedging strategy. Now, the United States position, as I say, has been rebalanced. It's not the dominant power in East Asia as it used to be. It's not the dominant power in Latin America as it used to be. New powers are emerging. A more multipolar order is emerging globally and regionally in East Asia. China likes that very much. India likes that very much. Brazil likes that very much. The Americans, not so sure. But whether we Americans like it or not, it's a reality that the Americans will have to adjust themselves to. The Bush administration, I would say, has not quite understood this new reality. But hopefully the next American administration, whichever it is, will adjust itself to this changed reality globally, but also in Asia. But one has to ask, when you look at major power relations in Asia, what is the major relationship? What is the major, most significant relations between the big powers in Asia? It's now between China and the United States. China is now the most important regional power in Asia. It's not Japan anymore. For most of the post-war era,